So today is June 18th, 2017, and the Huffington Post has made some waves recently with its popular publication on the hourly income you need to afford rent around the United States. So they claim that their math shows exactly which wage rate is required to afford rent in any state. The report begins by claiming that full-time workers who make minimum wage cannot afford a two-bedroom rental home in any state in the U.S. without spending more than the recommended 30% of their income. This is according to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Now, the Huffington Post here inadvertently admits that its title was basically clickbait, not exactly true by denotative standards. This is a rather precise set of terms, not just the basic income required to afford the basic rental across the United States. So now that we've got that out of the way, we can move on to what the Coalition and the Huffington Post now identify as so-called needs. The report continues. The Coalition's annual outreach report compares minimum wages and housing costs in states, metropolitan areas, and counties across the country. And what is their conclusion? They conclude that this year's results show the hourly wage rate needed, not desired or coveted, but needed for a modest two-bedroom rental is more than double the federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour in all but 4 states. Now, I am in awe of the statistician's temerity to characterize a two-bedroom home as either a need or even remotely modest. I am also impressed by the assumption that homes are a right rather than a privilege enabled by specialized divisions of labor and mutually perceived advantages through voluntary exchange. Of course, over time, the menu of temporal luxuries is due to extend to the realm of expectations. And the case of real estate fails to qualify as an exception to this tested phenomenon. However, it is not the mere passage of time or the advancement of the moral or social fabric of civilization which merits this change, but rather the economies of scale, the attending reduction of the marginal costs of production, and the productivity spawning from automation and applied labor-saving devices which have expanded the reach and efficacy of every worker to deliver these goods across the spectrum of middle to low income earners. The same is ubiquitously true and apparent in the consumer electronics industry, where each newly minted device, like the original mobile phones and the first big screen TVs, which were affordable to a very small segment of the population, became widely available to those middle to low income segments. So it was with the advancements and the enhancements of scale production and the widening sea of competitors bidding for market share that the prices of these goods collapsed, making those goods widely available to the average American worker whose own work leveraged similar advancements in his or her own specific industry. Anyway, homeownership and renting are examples of privileges sought out through the markets. These once existed as goods procured through one's own physical toil, and while today's intellectuals and minimum wage workers, and further some protesters claiming $15 per hour as the holy grail of wages, or maybe the Mendoza line, complain about injustice, they conveniently neglect to pay homage to the traditions of the past, a time when sovereign persons took responsibility for themselves and their families and didn't merely accuse others of denying them their rights to goods they didn't manufacture or produce. Oddly enough, the subject of this discussion, the minimum wage worker, represents a mere 4.3% of the nation's 75.9 million hourly paid workers and only 2.6% of all wage and salary workers. Furthermore, more than 55% of these workers are employed in leisure and hospitality, while 14% are in retail. An overwhelming majority of these workers, approximately 47%, are in food preparation and serving-related occupations, and most of these workers are relatively young. Roughly 51% are between the ages of 16 and 24, while 24% are teenagers, 16 to 19, and 64% of the total minimum wage demographic works part-time, and approximately 77% are white, and nearly half are women. Now, two of the macroeconomic forces which seem to always elude those famed surveyors of those problems which plague the lower to middle income segments of the population are these: what government has done to our money and what they have done to real estate, among other things. Now, purchasing a home today is scarcely comparable to purchasing anything else, unless you're looking at the Dow Jones or the S&P, or maybe looking to invest in college tuition. These are all industries highly leveraged on debt that is tacitly endorsed, largely purchased, or outright guaranteed by government bodies or government-sponsored enterprises. These financial puts or moral hazards, combined with an environment of accommodative low interest rate policies to empower disproportionate speculation in these markets, where we find exorbitant, even extraterrestrial levels of loan-to-value ratios, or in the case of the Dow Jones, record high levels of margin debt and stock buybacks, with a Dow Jones to GDP ratio that rivals the 1999 dot-com bubble high. These artifices ride alongside even further measures by government, which, despite their warm and fuzzy cosmetic and oftentimes cosmopolitan intentions, rooted in grandiose notions of ill-defined preservation and diversification, have led to constraints on supply and clever redistributions of purchasing power that fail to resolve the shortage which is responsible for those vilified prices. So it is demonstrably true that the critics of the housing space and the industry's astronomically high prices are individuals who simply do not understand the character or functionality of the price system, which works to align mutual interests across physical space and time between producers whose respective goods yield a progressive equilibrium of voluntary exchange. Now, the other regressive component intimately involved with the standard of living experienced by the minimum wage worker is the quality of his or her wage. This has been widely eroded by a systematic and perennial expectation, and historically an expedient, that the government ensure general price increases of 2% each year, part of the Federal Reserve's so-called dual mandate. Oddly enough, the Huffington Post article points to the fact that the 1968 federal minimum wage was equivalent to $10.90 in 2015 dollars, nearly $4 less than today's minimum wage. The article recognizes that the minimum wage has failed to keep pace with the rate of inflation. Now, I wonder why the author didn't instead voyage into the potential damage caused by inflation before publishing this hit piece. Probably because she doesn't understand economics well enough to recognize it. Of course, price floors, such as the minimum wage, don't organically make anyone richer, as they eliminate any marginal value of labor for any production below that arbitrary level. In fact, the law makes it completely illegal to hire anyone whose marginal productivity falls below that subjectively determined line, and it automatically reduces the quantity of labor demanded in the market, disproportionately affecting low-skilled minority workers, the very segment of the population whose interests this form of legislation purports to promote. In conclusion, this country doesn't need higher nominal wages. It doesn't need anything. What the author means to say is this: the lives of these workers would improve dramatically if they were to acquire more inexpensive living options, if the returns on their productivity merited something better than what they have today. What would benefit this country and its people is higher productivity and higher real wages. Of course, this kind of language risks sounding more condescending than it intends. Instead, the author commits to an emotional appeal and misses the whole organic propensity of the market economy to discover better value at lower prices.